Hello and welcome to the Cultured Bumpkin. This is chapter 13 of A Connecticut Yankee and King Arthur's Court um, by Mark Twain. So it's a funny book. And again, this is a live studio recording, you might say. And when I'm done with the recording, then I put it on YouTube in audiobook form. So uh, here we go. Chapter 13 Free Men. Yes, it is strange how little a while at a time a person can be contented. Only a little while back, when I was writing and suffering, what a heaven this peace, this rest, this sweet serenity in this secluded shady nook by this purling stream would have seemed, where I could keep perfectly comfortable all the time by pouring a dipper of water into my armor now and then. Yet already I was getting dissatisfied, partly because I could not light my pipe. For although I had long ago started a match factory, I had forgotten to bring matches with me, and partly because we had nothing to eat. Here was another illustration of the childlike improvidence of this age and people. A man in armor always trusted to chance for his food on a journey and would have been scandalized at the idea of hanging a basket of sandwiches on his spear. There was probably not a knight of all the Round Table combination who would not have rather died than been caught carrying such a thing as that on his flagstaff. And yet there could not be anything more sensible. It had been my intention to smuggle a couple of sandwiches into my helmet, but I was interrupted in the act and had to make an excuse and lay them aside, and a dog got them. Night approached, and with it, a storm. The darkness came on fast. We must camp, of course. I found good shelter for the uh, I found good shelter for the demoiselle under a rock and went off and found another for myself. But I was obliged to remain in my armor because I could not get it off by myself and yet could not allow Alessandre to help uh, because it would have seemed so like undressing before folk. It would not have amounted to that in any reality because I had clothes on underneath, but the prejudices of one's breeding are not gotten rid of at just a jump. And I knew when it came to stripping off that bob-tailed iron petticoat, I should be embarrassed. So he's going across the countryside looking for this castle, and he is wearing an iron jacket, so to speak. So remember, if you are catching the replay or watching live, this will all be edited into an audiobook and put on the Cultured Bumpkin, my YouTube channel, where I put all of my classic works or recordings, I should say. Okay. With the storm came a change of weather, and the stronger the wind blew and the wilder the rain lashed around, the colder and colder it got. Pretty soon, various kinds of bugs and ants and worms and things began to flock in and out of the wet and crawl down inside my armor to get warm. And while some of them behaved well enough and snuggled up amongst my clothes and got quiet, the majority were of a restless, uncomfortable sort and never stayed still, but went on prowling and hunting for they did not know what, especially the ants, which went tickling along in wearisome procession from one end of me to the other by the hour, and are a kind of creatures which I never wish to sleep with again. It would be my advice to persons situated in this way to not roll or thrash around, because this excites the interest of all the different sorts of animals and makes every last one of them want to turn out and see what's going on. And this makes things worse than they were before. And of course, makes you and of course makes you objurgate harder too, if you can. Still, if one did not roll and thrash around, he would die. Perhaps it is as well to do so perhaps it is well to do one way as the other. There's no real choice. Even after I was frozen solid, I could still distinguish that tickling just as a corpse does when he's taking electric treatment. I said I would never wear armor after this trip. All those trying hours, whilst I was frozen and yet was in a living fire, as you may say, on account of that swarm of crawlers, that same unanswerable question kept circling and circling through my tired head. How do people stand this miserable armor? How have they managed to stand it all these generations? How can they sleep at night for dreading the tortures of the next day? When the morning came at last, I was in a bad enough plight, seedy, drowsy, fagged from want of sleep, weary from thrashing around, famished from long fasting, pining for a bath, and to get rid of the animals, and crippled with rheumatism. And how it had fared with the nobly born, the titled aristocrat, the demoiselle Alessandre Le Carletois. I don't even know how to say that last name. Alessandre La Cartelois. Why, she was as fresh as a squirrel. She had slept like the dead. And as for a bath, probably neither she nor any other noble in the land had ever had one, so she was not missing out. Measured by modern standards, they were merely modified savages, these people. This noble lady showed no impatience to get to breakfast, and that smacks of the savage, too. On their journeys, those Britons were used to long fasts and knew how to bear them, and also how to freight up against probable fasts before starting, after the style of the Indian and the anaconda. As like as not, Sandy was loaded for a 3-day stretch. We were off before sunrise, Sandy riding and I limping along behind. In half an hour, we came upon a group of ragged, poor creatures who had assembled to mend the thing which was regarded as a road. They were as humble as they were as humble as animals. They were as humble as animals to me. And when I proposed to breakfast with them, they were so flattered, so overwhelmed by this extraordinary condescension of mine, that at first they were not able to believe that I was in earnest. My lady put up her scornful lip and withdrew to one side. She said in their hearing that she would as soon think of eating with the other cattle, a remark which embarrassed these poor devils merely because it referred to them, and not because it insulted or offended them, for it didn't. And yet they were not slaves, not chattels. By a sarcasm of law and phrase, they were free men. 7/10 of the population of the country were of just their class and degree. Small, independent farmers, artisans, etc., which is to say, they were the nation, the actual nation. They were all They were about all of it that was useful or worth saving or really respect worthy, and to subtract them would have been to subtract the nation and leave behind some dregs, some refuse in the shape of a king, nobility, and gentry, idle, unproductive, acquainted mainly with the arts of wasting and destroying, and of no sort of use or value in any rationally constructed world. And yet, by ingenious contrivance, this gilded minority, instead of being in the tail of the procession where it belonged, was marching head up and banners flying at the other end of it, had elected itself to be the nation, and these innumerable clams had permitted it so long as they had come at last to accept it as the truth, and not only that, but to believe it right and as it should be. The priests had told their fathers and themselves that this ironical state of things was ordained of God, and so, not reflecting upon how unlike God it would be to amuse himself with sarcasms, and especially such poor transparent ones as these, they had dropped the matter there and become respectfully quiet. All right, getting on there. Where are we? Okay. The talk of these meek people had a strange enough sound in a formerly American ear. They were freemen, but they could not leave the estates of their lord or their bishop without his permission. They could not prepare their own bread, but must have their corn ground and their bread baked at his mill and his bakery, and pay roundly for the same. They could not sell a piece. They could not sell a piece of their own property without paying a handsome percentage of the proceeds, nor buy a piece of somebody else's without remembering him in cash for the privilege. They had to harvest his grain for him. They had to harvest his grain for him gratis and be ready to come at a moment's notice, leaving their own crop to destruction by the threatened storm. They had to let him plant fruit trees in their fields and then keep their indignation to themselves when his heedless fruit gatherers trampled the grain around the trees. They had to smother their anger when his hunting parties galloped through their fields, laying waste the result of their patient toil. They were not allowed to keep doves themselves, and when swarms from my lord's dovecote settled on their crops, they must not lose their temper and kill a bird, for awful would the penalty be when the harvest was at last gathered. Then came the procession of robbers to levy their blackmail upon it. First, the church carted off its fat tenth. Then the king's commissioner took his 20th. Then my lord's people made a mighty inroad upon the remainder, after which the skinned freeman had liberty to bestow the remnant in his barn, in case it was worth the trouble. There were taxes and taxes and taxes, and more taxes and taxes again, and yet other taxes upon this free and independent pauper, but none upon his lord the baron or the bishop, none upon the wasteful nobility or the all-devouring church. If the baron could sleep unvexed, the freeman must sit up all night after his day's work and whip the ponds to keep the frogs quiet. If the freeman's daughter, but no, that last infamy of monarchical government is unprintable. And finally, if the freeman, grown desperate with his tortures, found his life unendurable under such conditions, and sacrificed it and fled to death for mercy and refuge, the gentle church condemned him to eternal fire. The gentle law buried him at midnight at the crossroads with a stake through his back, and his master, the baron or the bishop, confiscated all his property and turned his widow and his orphans out of doors. Hey Braden, what's going on, man? Yeah, just doing a little audiobook recording here. And here were these freemen assembled in the early morning to work on their lord the bishop's road 3 days each, gratis. Every head of the family, every son of a family, 3 days each, gratis, and a day or so added for their servants. Why, it was like reading about France and the French before the ever-memorable and blessed Revolution, which swept 1,000 years of such villainy away in one swift tidal wave of blood. One, a settlement of that hoary debt in the proportion of a half drop of blood for each hogshead of it that had been pressed by slow tortures out of the people in the weary stretch of 10 centuries of wrong and shame and misery, the like of which was not to be mated but in hell. There were 2 reigns of terror, if we but remember it and consider it. The one wrought murder in hot passion, the other in heartless cold blood. The one lasted mere months, the other had lasted 1,000 years. The one inflicted death upon 10,000 persons, the other upon 100 millions. But our shudders are all for the horrors but our shudders are all for the horrors of the minor terror, the momentary terror, so to speak. Whereas what is the horror of swift death by the axe compared with lifelong death from hunger, cold, insult, cruelty, and heartbreak? What is swift death by lightning compared with death by slow fire at the stake? A city cemetery could contain the coffins filled by that brief terror which we have all been so diligently taught to shiver at and mourn over, but all France could hardly contain the coffins filled by that older and real terror, that unspeakably bitter and awful terror which none of us has been taught to see in its vastness or pity as it deserves. These poor ostensible freemen who were sharing their breakfast and their talk with me were as full of humble reverence for the king and church and nobility as their worst enemy could desire. There was something pitifully ludicrous about it. I asked them if they supposed a nation of people ever existed who, with a free vote in every man's hand, would elect that a single family and its descendants should reign over it forever, whether gifted or boobies, to the exclusion of all the other families, including the voters. and would also elect that a certain 100 families should be raised to dizzy summits of rank and clothed on with offensive transmissible glories and privileges to the exclusion of the rest of the nation's families, including his own. They all looked unhit and said they didn't know. They said that they had never thought about it before, and it had never occurred to them that a nation could be so situated that every man could have a say in the government. Let's see. Okay. You see, my kind of loyalty was loyalty to one's country, not to its institutions or its office holders. The country is the real thing, the substantial thing, the eternal thing. It is the thing to watch over and care for and be loyal to. Institutions are extraneous. They are its mere clothing, and clothing can wear out and become ragged, cease to be comfortable, cease to protect the body from winter, disease, and death. To be loyal to rags, to shout for rags, to worship rags, to die for rags, that is a loyalty of unreason. It is pure animal. It belongs to monarchy, was invented by monarchy. Let monarchy keep it. I was from Connecticut, whose constitution declares that all political power is inherent in the people, and all free governments are founded on their authority and instituted for their benefit, and that they have at all times an undeniable and indefeasible right to alter their form of government in such a manner as they think expedient. Under that gospel, the citizen who thinks he sees that the Commonwealth's political clothes are worn out and yet holds his peace and does not agitate for a new suit is disloyal. He is a traitor. That he may be the only one who thinks he sees this decay, does not accuse him, does not excuse him. It is his duty to agitate anyway, and it is the duty of others to vote him down if they do not see the matter as he does. And now here I was, in a country where a right to say how the country should be governed was restricted to 6 persons in each 1,000 of its population. For the 994 to express dissatisfaction with the for the 994 to express dissatisfaction with the regnant system and propose to change it would have made the whole 6 shudder as one man. It would have been so disloyal, so dishonorable, such putrid black treason. So to speak, I was become a stockholder in a corporation where 994 of the members furnished all the money and did all the work, and the other 6 elected themselves a permanent board of direction and took all the dividends. It seemed to me that what the 994 dupes needed was a new deal. The thing that would have best suited the circus side of my nature would have been to resign the bossship and get an insurrection and turn it into a revolution. But I knew that the Jack Cade or the Wat Tyler who tries such a thing without first educating his materials up to revolution grade is almost absolutely to get left. I had never been accustomed to getting left, even if I do say it myself. Wherefore the deal, which had been for some time working into shape in my mind, was of a quite different pattern from the Cade-Tyler sort. So I did not talk blood and insurrection to that man there, who sat munching black bread with that abused and mistraught herd of human sheep, but took him aside and talked matter of another sort to him. After I'd finished, I got him to lend a little ink from his veins, and with this and a sliver, I wrote on a piece of bark, "Put him in the man factory," and gave it to him and said, "Take it to the palace at Camelot and give it into the hands of Amyas de Poulet, whom I call Clarence, and he'll understand." "Well, he's a priest then," said the man, and some of the enthusiasm went out of his face. "How, a priest? Didn't I tell you that no chattel of the church, no bondslave of pope or bishop can enter my man factory? Didn't I tell you that you couldn't enter unless you were Didn't I tell you that you couldn't enter unless your religion, whatever it might be, was your own free property? Mary, it is so, and for that I was glad. Wherefore it lacked me not, and bred in me a cold doubt to hear of this priest being there. But he isn't a priest, I tell you. The man looked far from satisfied. He said, he's not a priest, and yet he can read. He is not a priest, and yet he can read. Yes, and write too, for that matter. I taught him myself. The man's face cleared. And it's the first thing that you yourself will be taught in that factory? I? I would give. The man's face cleared. And it's the first thing that you yourself will be taught in that factory. I? I'd give the blood out of my heart to know that art. Why, I'll be your slave. No, you won't. You won't be anybody's slave. Take your family and go along. Your lord the bishop will confiscate your small property, but no matter. Clarence will fix you all right. So that is chapter 13, Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's Court. You can check it out on YouTube with the Cultured Bumpkin. And when I'm all done, I will edit it and turn it into an audiobook. So thank you very much for watching, whether you're live or catching the replay. Please like and subscribe if you would. And I will catch you probably tomorrow. I would love to know when a good time is. So if you're watching this, let me know when a good time for you, like in the evening, because I'm central. But I like to take people's schedules into account. Anywho, let me know. Talk to you later.